The call came on a Tuesday, a harsh intrusion into the sterile quiet of Alex's downtown apartment. It was his mother. Her voice, a normally steady and comforting presence, was a trembling whisper on the line. "Alex, it's your Uncle David." She didn't have to finish. Alex's heart, a finely tuned instrument of logic and deduction, skipped a beat. David, his uncle, his hero, his anchor in a chaotic family, the one person who had always seen him, who had encouraged his passion for puzzles and patterns, the one person he hadn't spoken to in 3 years. "What about him?" Alex asked, the words feeling foreign and clumsy in his mouth. "He's gone, Alex. They found him this morning, in his study." The silence that followed was louder than any noise. Alex stood in the center of his minimalist living room, a space so organized and devoid of clutter it felt like a museum, and felt a profound sense of dislocation. David, the brilliant and eccentric writer, the man who had built a world with words, was gone. "The police are calling it a suicide," his mother continued, her voice breaking. "They said he left a note." The word suicide didn't sit right with Alex. David was many things, a genius, an eccentric, a recluse. But he was not a man who would give up. He was a man who saw the world as a complex puzzle, and he was the one who was always trying to put the pieces together. No, a man like that didn't just give up. He didn't just walk away from a puzzle he was so close to solving. "I'm coming home," Alex said, the words a quiet, fierce certainty. He didn't wait for her to respond. He hung up, grabbed his keys, and walked out the door, his mind already working, already beginning to piece together the fragments of what he knew and what he didn't. He was no longer just an analyst in a big city. He was a detective, and he was going home. The drive was long, the miles a blur of highway and endless fields. As he got closer, the familiar landscape began to reappear, a world he had left behind but that had never truly left him. The rolling hills, the ancient oak trees, the winding roads. And then there it was, his hometown. It was a place frozen in time, a postcard of small-town America. The main street was lined with red brick buildings with painted awnings and flower boxes. The old clock tower stood in the center, its hands forever stuck at 2:45. The air was thick with the scent of autumn leaves and wood smoke. It looked peaceful, but Alex knew better. Beneath the idyllic surface, there was always something lurking, a secret, a truth that was waiting to be uncovered. He drove past the familiar landmarks, the old diner where he had his first kiss, the library where he had spent countless hours with his uncle, the school where he had learned to love logic and deduction. The town was a living memory, a space filled with ghosts of the past. He pulled up to his parents' house, a sprawling Victorian home with a porch swing and a white picket fence. It was a picture-perfect home, the kind of home that held 1,000 secrets. His mother opened the door, her face a mask of grief and relief. She hugged him tightly, the embrace of a woman who had lost a brother and was afraid of losing a son. "I knew you would come," she whispered, her voice filled with a quiet, devastating certainty. His father, a quiet and stoic man, was sitting in the living room, a glass of whiskey in his hand. He looked older, his face lined with a grief that he was trying to hide. "The police have been here," he said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "They said it was a clean case. They said he was just tired." "He wasn't tired," Alex said, his voice filled with a quiet, fierce conviction. "He was never tired. He was always working. He was always searching. He was always on the verge of a breakthrough." His father sighed, a sound filled with a profound sense of sadness. "He was always a dreamer, Alex, a man who lived in his own world. He couldn't handle the pressure. He couldn't handle the fact that his last book was a failure." "His last book wasn't a failure," Alex said, his voice filled with a quiet, devastating certainty. "It was a masterpiece. a puzzle, a key to something he was trying to solve. His father shook his head. "You sound just like him," he said, his voice filled with a quiet, desperate warning. "You should have stayed in the city. You should have stayed away from here, from all of this." Alex didn't respond. He knew what his father was trying to tell him. He knew that this was a warning to let it go, a warning to leave the past alone. But he couldn't. He wouldn't. He had to know the truth. For his uncle, for himself. He went to his uncle's house, a small, secluded cottage on the edge of town. It was just as he remembered it, a haven of books, a quiet place filled with the scent of old paper and ink. He stepped inside, his boots echoing in the silence. The air was cold, stale, and smelled of death. The police had been thorough, but they hadn't found what he was looking for. He knew that the truth wasn't in plain sight. It was hidden, a secret buried deep within his uncle's labyrinth of thoughts. He walked into the study, the room where his uncle had spent his last moments. The desk was clean, organized, a meticulous and unsettling portrait of a man who was getting his affairs in order. But Alex saw something else. He saw the subtle details, the things that were out of place. A single book on the desk, an old copy of The Great Gatsby. It was a book his uncle hated. He always said it was a story about an illusion, a lie that everyone wanted to believe. Alex knew that this was a message, a secret signal from his uncle. He picked up the book and turned the pages. He was looking for a note, a hidden message. He found nothing. He put the book back on the desk and looked around the room. He saw a picture of his uncle with his father and mother. They were all young, smiling, filled with a hope and innocence that had long been lost. He felt a profound sense of sadness. He knew that this was a family that had once been close, but had been torn apart by something he didn't yet understand. He left the study, his mind a whirlwind of thoughts. He knew that the truth was hidden somewhere in this house. He knew that his uncle had left him clues. He just had to find them. He had to find the truth, no matter what the cost. The funeral was a blur of black suits and hushed condolences. Alex stood at the graveside, watching as his uncle was lowered into the ground, a final, unceremonious end for a man who had lived such a vibrant life in the world of his own imagination. He felt numb, a quiet observer in a play he didn't understand. His family was there, a united front of grief, but Alex felt a chasm between them. The polite smiles, the strained conversations, the way they avoided his gaze, it all felt like a performance. They were grieving, but it was a grief that felt rehearsed, a grief that had been prepared for a long time. After the burial, they all gathered at the law firm for the reading of the will. The air in the room was thick with unspoken tension, a silent battle for control over a legacy they all believed belonged to them. Alex sat in the corner, his mind already moving past the rituals, focused on the mystery his uncle had left behind. He knew that the will was just another piece of the puzzle, a final message from a man who had planned every detail of his exit.
The lawyer, a tall, gaunt man with a tired expression, cleared his throat and began to read. David's estate was substantial, a testament to his success as a writer. There were financial assets, properties, and, most importantly, his vast collection of personal papers and manuscripts. The initial bequests were simple, straightforward. His mother and father received a generous sum of money. His aunts and cousins received their share. They all looked relieved, their faces betraying a sense of entitlement. Then the lawyer's voice shifted. To my nephew Alex, I bequeath my entire collection of books, personal journals, and the complete contents of my private study. A collective gasp filled the room. The faces of his family members, which had been so composed moments before, contorted with shock and disbelief. They had expected money, they had expected property, but they had not expected this. The study was the heart of David's world, the sanctum where he had created his masterpieces. To them it was just a room full of books and papers. To Alex, it was everything. Aunt Carol, a woman who had always treated Alex with a polite but distant condescension, spoke up. "That's unusual," she said, her voice laced with a thin, sharp edge. "Why would David do that? We are his family." The lawyer, unflappable, continued. In a handwritten addendum, Mr. Peterson added a personal note. He wished it to be read aloud, but only to Mr. Alex Peterson. He looked at Alex, a small, knowing smile on his face. "May I read it now, or would you prefer a private moment?" "Now," Alex said, his voice firm. He wanted them to hear it. He wanted them to know that he was the one who was meant to solve this.
The lawyer unfolded a small, yellowed piece of paper. He cleared his throat again and began to read. "Alex, if you are reading this, it means you have returned. It means you are looking for the truth. The key to the truth is not in the words I wrote, but in the silence between them. The final puzzle is hidden in plain sight. I've left you a trail of breadcrumbs, but be warned, they will lead you to a dark place. The truth I was searching for is a ghost, a phantom of the past that still haunts this town. The truth is in the hands of the one who betrayed me, the one who wears a mask of righteousness." The room went silent. His family stared at him, their expressions a mix of confusion, fear, and a dawning sense of understanding. They didn't know what the note meant, but they knew it was a threat. They knew that their comfortable lives were about to be turned upside down. They knew that Alex was not just back for a funeral, he was back for the truth. Alex felt a cold wave of realization wash over him. This wasn't just about a suicide. This was a message, a coded message from a dying man to the only person he trusted to finish his work. He looked at his family, at their strained faces, their eyes filled with a new kind of fear. He knew that one of them was the traitor. One of them was the one who wore a mask of righteousness. The game had just begun. Alex drove back to his uncle's cottage, the words of the will echoing in his mind. The key to the truth is not in the words I wrote, but in the silence between them. He had to look beyond the obvious to the things that were missing, the gaps in the story. His uncle had always communicated in puzzles, and this was his final, most critical one. He let himself into the study, the place now his, and the silence was different this time. It wasn't the silence of an empty house, but the quiet of a waiting room. He saw the Great Gatsby book on the desk, a blatant decoy. He had to be smarter. He had to think like David. He had to ignore the obvious and look for the subtle. He walked to the bookshelf, a towering floor-to-ceiling monument to his uncle's mind. The books were arranged in no discernible order, a chaotic library of a man who read and wrote without a system. But Alex's analytical mind saw a pattern. There was a subtle inconsistency in the spines of the books. He ran his hand along a row, his fingers brushing against old leather and new paper. It was a line of 5 books, all with a distinct, unsettling feel to them. They were all copies of his uncle's earlier works, the ones that had made him famous.
He pulled them out, one by one. There was The Broken Mirror, The Silent City, The Cursed Clock, The Phantom Song, and The Last Echo. All of them were first editions, signed by his uncle. He noticed something else. The page numbers in all 5 books were different. They were out of order. Alex's mind, a finely tuned instrument of logic and deduction, began to work. This wasn't a random collection. It was a cipher. He took the books to the desk and laid them out. He opened them and looked at the pages. He had to find the silence between the words. He had to find the missing pieces. He remembered a story his uncle had told him once about a famous cryptographer who would hide messages in plain sight by using the spaces between words, the punctuation, and the empty pages. The gaps were the message. He started with the first book, The Broken Mirror. He flipped through the pages, looking for anything out of place. He noticed a single, solitary dot of ink on a blank page. It was a tiny, almost invisible mark, the kind a careless writer might make with the tip of his pen. But David was not careless. He was meticulous. Alex looked closer, and he noticed that the dot was not just a mark. It was a tiny, minuscule map. It was a key. He took a magnifying glass and examined the dot. He saw a tiny, intricate map of a small forest with a single, winding path leading to a clearing. At the center of the clearing, there was a small, crudely drawn symbol, a single, solitary oak tree with a gnarled, twisted branch. It was a symbol he had seen before in an old family album, a picture of his father, David, and his mother, all standing in front of that very tree. A ghost of the past.
He looked at the other books. They all had similar marks, all different, but all keys to the same map. He had found his trail of breadcrumbs. He had found the silence between the words. He knew what his uncle wanted him to do. He wanted him to go back to the past. He wanted him to go to the very place where their family had been torn apart. He wanted him to confront the ghost that haunted their town. He felt a profound sense of foreboding. He knew that this was a dangerous path. He knew that the truth was hidden in a place he didn't want to go. He knew that this journey would lead him to a dark place. He knew that the ghost his uncle was talking about was not a thing, but a person. And he knew that he was not alone in this game. He was being watched. He could feel it. The traitor was out there, and he was waiting for him to make his first move. The game had just become very real. Alex's hands trembled as he held the map, a tiny, almost invisible dot of ink that was the key to his family's past. He knew the location instantly. It was the old Peterson family land, a sprawling, forgotten piece of the countryside that bordered the national forest. The place where he, his uncle, and his father had spent their summers. A place that was now nothing more than a ghost, a faded memory of a happier time. He drove in silence, the miles slipping by. He felt the weight of his family's expectations on his shoulders, the silent judgment of his father, the desperate hope of his mother. He knew they were watching him, waiting for him to fail, to give up on this foolish quest. But he couldn't. He had to know the truth, for his uncle, for himself. He pulled his car to the side of a narrow gravel road. The woods were dark and quiet, the only sound the crunch of his boots on the fallen leaves. He walked for what felt like miles, his senses on high alert. He was no longer the analyst, the man of logic and numbers. He was a hunter, a detective, a man on a quest for the truth. He felt a profound sense of foreboding, a chilling certainty that he was not alone. The traitor was out there, in the shadows, waiting for him. He reached the clearing, a place he remembered from his childhood, a place where he and his uncle had built a treehouse. The old oak tree was still there, a gnarled and twisted sentinel, its ancient branches reaching towards the sky like skeletal fingers. It looked even more imposing than in the faded photograph. He walked to the base of the tree and ran his hands along the gnarled bark, his fingers searching for a hidden compartment, a secret message. He found it, a loose piece of bark, almost imperceptible. He pulled it away, revealing a small, hollowed-out space. Inside, there was a small, worn-out leather journal. The pages were yellowed and brittle, but the ink was still vibrant. He opened the journal and began to read. The first entry was dated 20 years ago, the day of his mother and father's wedding.
It was written in a shaky, almost unreadable hand, a different handwriting than his uncle's. It was his father's journal. Alex's hands trembled as he read. The journal detailed a secret, a dark secret that had been hidden for 20 years, a secret about his father and his uncle, and his mother. His father had been in a car accident, a drunk driving accident that had killed a young girl. His uncle had been in the car with him, a witness to the whole thing. His father had panicked. He had convinced his uncle to take the blame, to tell the police that it was his uncle who was driving. The accident was covered up, the truth buried. Alex felt a cold wave of nausea wash over him. He had always known that his father was a man of quiet grief, but he had never known why. Now he knew. His father was a murderer, and his uncle had taken the blame. The mask of righteousness was not his father, but his family, his entire family who had covered up the truth to protect themselves.
He looked around the clearing, his mind reeling. The truth was not just a ghost, it was a shadow, a stain on his family's past. He felt a profound sense of betrayal, a devastating realization that his entire life had been a lie. He closed the journal, his hands shaking. He had found the truth, but it was a truth he didn't want to know. He felt a presence behind him, a cold, chilling certainty that he was not alone. He turned, his heart pounding in his chest. A figure was standing at the edge of the clearing, a silhouette against the fading sunlight. It was his father. He was holding a gun. "I knew you would come here, Alex," his father said, his voice a low, steady rumble. "I knew you would come to the place where we buried the truth." The game was not just real. It was a matter of life and death. Alex froze, his heart hammering against his ribs. The gun in his father's hand looked heavy, unnatural. The setting sun cast long, menacing shadows through the trees, making his father's face a dark, unreadable mask. "Why?" Alex asked, his voice barely a whisper. "Why are you here, and why do you have that?" "You know why," his father said, his voice raw with a pain so deep it sounded like a growl. "You read the journal. You know what I did. I had to protect us. The family." His eyes, normally so full of quiet sadness, were now filled with a desperate, frantic fear. He wasn't a killer. He was a man who'd been running from his past for 20 years, and now it had finally caught up to him. "David knew," Alex said, his voice firm, filled with a new kind of conviction. "He knew you would come here. He knew you would try to stop me. He left me this journal not just to expose you, but to save you from yourself." His father's face crumpled. He promised he wouldn't tell anyone. He promised, he stammered, his hand trembling. He was always a dreamer, a man of truth. He just couldn't live with the lie. "The lie is what killed him," Alex said. "A cold, hard truth. He couldn't live with the burden of what you made him do. He carried your sin for 20 years. His father's body went limp. He lowered the gun, his shoulders slumping in defeat. The cold, metallic object slipped from his fingers and fell to the ground with a dull thud. He looked at Alex, and in his eyes, Alex saw not just a father, but a broken, defeated man. He saw the truth, the pain, the guilt that had been eating at him for 2 decades. The mask of righteousness had finally fallen. "I'm so sorry, son," his father whispered, his voice cracking with a pain that was 1,000 times more devastating than any physical wound. "I'm so sorry." Alex walked over to him and put his hand on his father's shoulder. It was a gesture of forgiveness, a silent promise that he was not alone. They stood in silence for a long time, the setting sun casting a golden glow on the old oak tree, a place where a family had once been broken and now, by the grace of a dead man's puzzle, was beginning to heal. The next morning, his father turned himself in to the police. The news spread like wildfire through the town. A secret that had been burying for 20 years had finally been unearthed.
The town, a place that had always seemed so perfect, so serene, was now a place filled with uncomfortable questions. The past had finally caught up to them. Alex stayed. He was no longer just a visitor, a detective on a mission. He was home. He went back to his uncle's cottage and began the long, arduous process of sorting through his papers, his manuscripts, his life's work. He found a final note from David, tucked inside a hidden compartment in his desk. It was a simple, handwritten letter. "The truth will set you free, Alex, and it will set our family free. Finish what I started." Alex didn't write a book. Instead, he published his uncle's journal, his father's journal, and the details of their secret in a single, unvarnished volume. He called it The Last Echo, a tribute to his uncle's final, most powerful message. The book became a sensation. It was a story of a family torn apart by a lie, and a story of a family that was finally finding its way back to one another.
He sold his city apartment and moved back to his hometown. He spent his days in his uncle's cottage, a quiet place of solace and peace, working to preserve his uncle's legacy and his family's story. He was still an analyst, a man of logic and numbers, but he was also something else. He was a son, a nephew, a man who had learned that the truth, no matter how painful, was the only way to heal a broken past. The town, for all its shock and judgment, was also a place of forgiveness. They had all been living a lie, and now they were all learning to live with the truth. They were all finding a new beginning. Alex's mother, once so frail and broken, found a new strength. She had lost a brother, but she had found her son, and she had finally found the truth. She was finally free. His father, in prison, was finally at peace. He was no longer running. He was no longer a ghost of the past. He was a man, finally facing the consequences of his actions. On a quiet autumn afternoon, Alex walked to the old oak tree in the clearing. The leaves were turning a brilliant shade of gold and red, and the air was filled with the scent of wood smoke and a quiet sense of hope. He looked at the tree, and he smiled. It was no longer a monument to a buried secret. It was a symbol of a new beginning, a testament to the fact that sometimes the only way to find your way home is to confront the ghosts of your past. Dear listeners, please subscribe to the channel Stories by Peter Hub and write in the comments where you are watching us from. I will be very interested to know where you are from.